You look good in blue. Good to see you.
And now for the man of the hour, this guy over here. Did someone just go, whoop, whoop? I first met Paul Caponigro when I was teaching at the Maine Photographic Workshops in Rockport some 20 years ago. Actually, I think I officially met him swimming and sunning at Beauchamp Point, known as Caponigro's Rocks to most, as we both like to take advantage of the brief but glorious summers in Maine. Paul was very kind to me as a young teacher and would let me bring my students to his house. He'd play the piano for them until they were weeping, I'm not exaggerating, and then he'd bring them downstairs and show them his darkroom, and then he would sit down and ask what they wanted to see. And they'd shout out different pictures, and I'd go get the boxes down, and Paul would tell stories about each image. So thank you, Paul, for taking me under your wing and being so kind to me and my students. You changed our lives.
Nice to have you clucking with us.
And now for the official bio. I think everyone knows who we got here, but
Wait till you hear this.
this is pretty good. I got this off of different sources on the internet. So, born in Boston in, you don't have to say the year, Paul is one of America's foremost landscape photographers. While he became interested in photography at age 13, he also had a strong passion for music. He studied at Boston University College of Music in 1950 before deciding to focus on photography at the California School of Fine Art, which is now the San Francisco Art Institute.
I never studied there.
See? This is where the internet lies.
You took that off the wrong page.
Shit. Well, he met a guy there, Benjamin Chin.
I met a man who studied there, right?
Yeah, so he's going to tell you the real story. But Ansel Adams had established that first photo program, and Benjamin was a student of Ansel's, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, let's see. Despite the shift from music to photography early in his artistic career, Paul remains a dedicated piano player who believes that his musical training and insight influences his photographic imagery. Does that sound right?
Jeez.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Can't wait to hear about that.
Let's see. Caponigro is best known for his interest in natural forms, landscapes, and still lifes.
Yeah.
He had his first solo exhibition at the George Eastman House in 1958. In 1960, Caponigro began teaching photography at Boston University while consulting on various technical research projects with Polaroid.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
Yeah. He was awarded 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, 1966 and 1975. Which enabled him to pursue a long-term project of photographing ancient megalithic structures in England and Ireland. Sounds good so far. He also has 3 National Endowment Awards, the NEA grants. You said 2, but the internet says 3. And we'll just go right to the end. So during the 1970s, Paul moved to New Mexico and photographed the American Southwest while living in Santa Fe. And his work is included in numerous collections, including the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of New Mexico in Santa Fe, the Guggenheim Museum, and the Whitney Museum in New York. Without further, that's all this one webpage gave. So forget this. All right. So without further ado.
Thank you. And welcome, ladies, gentlemen, photographers. So the reason I'm here is because Ann Jastrup twisted my arm. You'll leave that on for a bit.
Yeah, okay.
I want to see these faces. Yeah, that's good. If it weren't for the fact that Ann twisted my arm and forced me into doing this, you wouldn't have me here. But then I explained to her, I have no prints, I don't have a slideshow, so I can't do it for you. And that's when we enlisted the Witherells, Hunt Tracy Witherell. Found out that I have a slideshow my son put together in Maine, and through the magic of computer equipment and online bullshit and all that, my son was able to transfer a slideshow to Witherell's equipment, and you've got a slideshow. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Witherell. Been quite a while since I've done this, so going to wing it. I'm going to show you a number of pictures that might be considered a kind of a retrospective. I'll show some very early pictures, move into my middle blue period, and then my later, who knows what period. I'll say a little something about some of them. Some of them I may want you to just look at them. But I will say a few words that'll give you a picture of where I've gone, how I got my training, etc., etc. And after that, I will allow questions, but only the right questions. If they're the wrong questions, you'll know about it. So we'll start out with thanking somebody to spell my name correctly. And we'll go to the first image. You'll never guess when that was taken.
Okay.
1953. I was in the U.S. Army in San Francisco. That's where I met my first real teacher in photography, Mr. Benjamin Chin, who had studied with Ansel Adams at the California School of Fine Arts, where they first instituted a program to teach photography as art. And you could actually get a degree. There were no other universities that were doing that. See, photography had not become art by then, during that period. So Benny became my teacher and eventually introduced me to a number of the West Coast people I've never known, like Ansel Adams, the Western Boys, Oliver Galliani, Imogen Cunningham, Dorothea Lange, Minor White. They were all associated with the California School of Fine Arts. And Benny said they even took the students down to see Edward Weston, where he would show original prints. It must have been quite a fine program. But Benjamin Chin took me under his wing and said, while you're here with the U.S. Army, I looked at your photographs and you've got a pretty good eye, but your technique sucks. He said, and I'm gonna try to pass on to you Ansel Adams' famous zone system of plan photography. I didn't know what he meant, but it turns out he really simplified it for me, get rid of a lot of the technical jargon, and put me directly in touch with film and papers on Army time and Army materials. I got my education a la West Coast photography. Then he used to take me on field trips along the ocean. 1956, that's way back there. I don't know if I can find that negative again. The U.S. Army decided they didn't want me in San Francisco anymore and shipped me down to Yuma, Arizona. Actually, I had a sergeant of the photo lab that I was in with Benny Chin who didn't like me. And he said, "I'm sending you to hell." I don't understand. He said, "You're going to Yuma, Arizona, 115 degrees in the shade. You're going to hell." And the fact is, I loved it. I loved the desert. It was dry heat, by the way. It worked out just fine. And I got a chance to practice the zone system of planned photography with Army materials. and even with the Jeeps, they paid for the gas, and the Jeeps travel out into the desert and have a wonderful time. This is another early one from maybe 57, 58, when I was living in Boston, and just looking for things to photograph. Somebody asked me, "What is that?" I said, "It's a photograph." And then they have to know of what. Of course, when you work with a camera, you're taking pictures of things, and you're supposed to know what the devil is photograph. But this gives you an idea that you can select portions of real life and abstract them in such a way as to make it something close to art. That's only close to art, it's not art. I found these in the back alleys of Boston Back Bay. That's where I was living at the time. Quite abstract. I don't know why I took this one, but I like it. And I learned that, by gosh, it's also photographic. What's photographic about it? The language of print. The language of print, that's where I was beginning to understand what Ansel could give you. That you could, like a painter works with paints on a palette, you work with a palette of tonalities, black to white. That's the first photograph I made that I liked. I really liked it. It was sort of abstract, and if you have to know what it is, it's frost on a glass window. And I like the idea that bright spot in the background. It reads like a cloud, it's really something else, and it's out of focus. Ansel taught me that I should really always focus near to far. Everything should be sharp. So, I had to thumb my nose at him on this occasion. Oh, I see. If I hold down, it goes quickly. Just like a goddamn iPhone, you have to touch it. One of my earlier photographs along the shores of Cape Cod, I guess, just south of Boston. It's, I'll tell you what it is, because that's what's interesting. The dark portions are ground up seaweed. The white portions are beach sand. What interested me was that the sea was coming up, washing on the sand, and arranging these patterns so that you could sense the energy of the sea working on the land. So feeling the forces was coming through in a visual sense. That was another part of, the better part of my later technique. I put aside his own system as technique, and I started thinking nature's forces. One of my great teachers, Minor White, he asked me to do a portrait of him. We were out on a field trip, and I couldn't imagine anything whiter. Minor White, dressed in white, amidst white tombstones and a white church and clouds. See the trees in the background? Minor at that time introduced me to infrared film, where everything green turns white. So this was my portrait of Minor the White. Great photographer, great teacher, extremely generous man. Thank you, Minor. I hung out in Rochester. Minor invited me to come. He was teaching at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Also did exhibitions at the George Eastman Museum of Photography. He was a curator. So we'd go out on field trips, and he taught us to read photographs. Minor loved having a group of students sit and look at their photos long enough to see what was in there. And when we got past the idea that we're identifying the subject, something else might come through, and that's what Minor liked. So he wasn't happy until I identified what this was. It wasn't a piece of paper nailed against the wall. It was two nuns having a conversation. Now get off there. I haven't learned to use these buttons yet. More in the streets of Rochester. It's a lovely arrangement of leaf, paper, ice. Doesn't matter what it is. It felt good to me. So I actually made it negative. Some people call this cubist. That's an artistic term, an art world term. Cubist. Those are ice cubes. Ice in a pool, a tide pool, that broke, reshaped, and gave me this lovely composition. My first real lesson in composition. This is also in Rochester. Colder than a witch's tit there in the winter. Working out in the field, trying to keep your fingers warm. I did this study of a graveyard. I didn't see until I printed that the line of the snow meets exactly the black patch in the back headstone. I just love that idea that they met. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't pre-visualize this. But it said, yeah, you should look more carefully at what you put in that, on that ground. See what can happen. Another in Rochester using infrared film. It's a rather exciting composition. A lot of energy. Not one of my best. Why do I like that? Oh my God, silence.
Thank you.
You see the faces? Yeah, and there's a whole human figure in there. A figure in white. And a rather attractive profile. A couple of them. So it reminded me of what Miner used to say. You can photograph a thing for what it is and for what else it is. And it was this what else that Miner was very strong about putting across. Seeing more into the images than you think you put there. Most of those zone system users, they think they know exactly what they got. They don't. Now this is zone system to the extreme. Black and white. But it's a rather lyrical little group of trees dancing in the snow. I like this one. Whoa. This was, I had a photographer tell me, in fact his name was Paul Strand, you know, you should have detail in every portion of your photo composition. And in this one I dropped the detail out in the background so that the shapes in the lighter tones would come forward and become something else. That what else, that like Miner says. And this one, some people see a kind of a city in the background. But for me, that dark figure-looking thing was like Merlin emerging from his cave and trying to decide which of the three roads he was going to travel. You like that? So that's my Merlin's cave. I'm sorry, but it's just so simple that it's beautiful. If you have to know what it is not a dandelion. It is actually a Scots thistle, which is 10 times the size of a dandelion, but the same structure. So, but I needed to get to the core of that plant to feel the structure of it. I peeled away some of the seeds. 1958. God, I've been around a long time. This is also around 1958 when I was still living in the Boston area, haunting the beaches and the tide pools. And this one very strongly expresses the idea I had about studying nature in such a way as to feel her forces. This graphically shows that nature's at work and causing these patterns and erosions. So you can feel nature at work. In one flat photo image. God, we're still way back. Did this in 56 at Point Lobos. Can you imagine? But it reminded me of one of those processes in becoming human. It's the sperm. And I found an image later, a beautiful rock, the shape of an egg. And the egg shape has a depression in it with the light of the sperm just ready to go into it. That was another thing Miner liked to teach, sequencing, which photograph to put with which to begin to tell stories. So I did a sequence on this with many other pictures about birth, coming into being. So that's my egg and sperm period. It's Gabriel blowing his horn up in the sky. And that house tumbled down much later. Not when he blew. Seaside energy. Minor White used to send us, his students, into the graveyards. He said, that's good imagery there. Good things to photograph. He liked this one in particular. He thought that whoever did that to the eyes of the skull head was revolting against death. So that's the angel of death, is the skull with the wings. And somebody came up and just sort of scratched around and said, screw you. Miner liked that idea. This one I liked particularly because, again, the forces in nature are at work here. The gravestone itself is crumbling and breaking. But how the ground is working up, the mud is spattering, trying to pull it back down, but the angel's wings are going up. As above, so below. Who the hell said that? Wonderful set of gravestones in Boston, I forget, Granary, the old Granary graveyard. There's some great opportunities. But this is not what that looked like. I made a negative print of this. The positive of those gravestones were interesting, but I got the idea that if I changed everything to the negative, they'd be more ghost-like. That's my Scotch thistle, not a dandelion. The one I peeled away some of the seeds to get to the core of it. Photographed it 2 or 3 times against those windows. I didn't become a famous photographer until I made that photograph. And then everybody said, "Oh my gosh, you're an artist." That looks just like, what's his name? Who?
Picasso.
Not Brock. Not Escher. Nude descending a staircase. Duchamp. He said, the critic in the newspaper said, just like Duchamp, nude descending a staircase. So he dubbed it art. What the hell? I wasn't going to argue with it. Back to Boston. Probably late 50s, early 60s. They were tearing the place apart. Left some very interesting surfaces to photograph. They not only tore things down, they burned things up. They were tearing out a huge section of Boston known as the West End. I forget what they were going to build a hospital there, but they tore down a great deal of that area in which were some, it left some nice possibilities for abstracty kind of photographs. And a lot of stonework, very delicate, very beautiful stuff. All of that destroyed in that whole process. Well, I documented most of it. I have many such photos of the material that was being destroyed. And I gave a set of prints to the Boston Historical Society. They were thrilled. They didn't give me any money, but they were thrilled to have the photos. 1959, we're moving forward. 59, Miner asked me to accompany him cross-country from Rochester. He was going to Portland, Oregon, where he spent a lot of time, and then was in San Francisco teaching workshops, and he asked me to accompany him, and we photographed our way cross-country. This was in the one of the national parks, Glacier National Park, and that particular photograph was what it felt like to be on that trip, kind of a wonderful adventure, with the road going off into who knows what. Took us through the Columbia River Gorge. We wound up at Cape Kiwanda, a lovely section of Oregon coastline. And again, the forces of nature visually arriving, that sandstone being buffeted by waves coming in, and it has all the feeling of the waves which have eroded and shaped it. It's a pretty image besides. No, it's pretty, not beautiful. Now that's a chunk of life in the middle of the desert, affirming itself. It's a burst from a desert plant. It says, I'm very much alive. Keep your water. Minor and I drove through, I guess this was Nevada. Back to Boston. 60s, I guess. During those early 60s, I rented a place out in the country north of Boston. Ipswich. There was a tremendous snowstorm that left these wonderful shapes. I went out the next day or two and just photographed my ass off. It was a wonderful little gnome that's sitting on the lawn, and these amazing deer shapes that are dancing in the snow. That whole blizzard was completely magical. Another one of my critics' art photographs. It's a photograph of ice. It's a river that has broken and refrozen. And no, that's Paul Klee. So it can be a photo of what it is and what else it is. It's Paul Klee. I had some friends in Boston that were painters, sculptors, a bunch of artists. One particular painter had a rather fabulous doll collection, so I got permission to work with her dolls. I was also a consultant for Polaroid. They were working with their new 4x5 positive negative material. You get not only a print, but a negative besides. I was using their film while making these doll pictures. It's a pretty good portrait of plant life, how it works. I think of that as the large mother leaf releasing a tendril, which really is like an umbilical cord. And then the new leaf coming out of that and reaching for the light. Negative print. Everything's reversed. I made a series of negatives in somebody's garden on plants. I spent a day or more trying to print them, and I was just not happy with the prints. It just wasn't working. And I worked hard. And I pulled out one of the negatives and I looked up at it and I thought, oh, for Christ's sakes, it's a negative image. So I had to make a photo of the negative of that group, and then I printed so that it's a negative image as a positive. I had great fun with that.
Wow.
Pretty magical garden.
Yeah.
When I got through with it. Reminded me of the time going in, this is 1965. The trip with Miner in 1959, that roadway picture. This is quite different configuration, but that feeling of winding off into who knows where, but looks adventurous. This is the Blue Ridge Parkway. Sunflower, if you couldn't tell, delivered to me by one of my early students, William Clift, on the birth of my son John. He brought this sunflower to myself and my wife. Congratulations on the birth of your child. And the sunflower sat on the kitchen table for a few days, kept looking at me. What do you want? And the sunflower said, take a good look. There's something going on here. So here it is, looking like the sun. And then I collected a bunch of flowers, sunflowers, put a vase together, and I had to say, okay, it's a homage to Van Gogh, very much like his sunflower vase. Now, isn't that sunflower smiling at you? Just that bare face, innocent, happy sunflower. And then the sunflower got photographed as a starburst. It pretty much expresses the energy that comes out of that plant. It turned out that that sunflower that was delivered that day intrigued me to such a degree that I spent the next 3 months in the field photographing sunflowers, bringing them back to my studio, working with them, waiting for them to dry. I did a book on the sunflower with images from the birth of the sunflower and then into the death of the sunflower. That is, they dried in very, very interesting ways to express some other dimension. So it's quite a good book. Look in your library. It's called Sunflowers. (1966), I got the Guggenheim grant and actually wanted to go to Egypt to photograph the Egyptian temples and learn about their mythology, but I was advised not to go to Egypt at that time because it was politically really hot. In fact, Dorothea Lange herself, I met her in New York, she said, if you're going to go to Italy, to Egypt, with a wife and a young boy, fly in from Italy and call yourself Paolo. Don't let them know you're an American. She said, I've had people throw stones at me in the Egyptian streets in Cairo. So my wife said, Paul, you want to photograph things ancient? I said, yeah, that's true. Well, there are things ancient in Ireland. So we did a little research and I found that, yes, indeed. In particular, the wonderful 10th century stone churches that the monks used to build. So we went to Ireland. Ireland had to be my Egypt. And photographed it. Oh, that's way overexposed. Boo. Try to imagine it darker. That too is still too bright. Screw it, I'll change those later. But I had a wonderful time. The masonry of the 7th century right up through the 10th, 11th century. Beautiful stone churches in monastic sites in Ireland. Ireland, guess what this is? The famous, even more famous than my rock wall, the running white deer. Those are albino deer. They're not overexposed. I got to the estate where they lived and went to the owner, got permission to work, and there were a few deer here, a few deer there, and some over there. I made a few photographs, but nothing was happening. And then it occurred to me, I went back to the owner and said, do you have a sheepdog? Of course, every farm in Ireland has a sheepdog. I said, well, could you get your dog to gather a couple dozen of these deer down to the end of your field? It's a simple task for the dog. He said, when I give you my signal, after you've gathered them, get your dog to chase them in my direction. I'm going to be hiding in the woods, shooting through the trees at this field. I knew just which tree my 5x7 view camera. But the deal was I had to be so far back that I had a 20-inch bellows extension. The light was getting low. I had to shoot wide open at almost a second exposure. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I figured the dog would chase the deer and they'd disperse anyway. So I gave the signal and the farmer told his dog, shoot him. And the dog went after the deer. And one deer took off by itself and the rest of the deer followed him. I thought, this is pure magic. I don't understand. I swear, that dog telepathically told that one deer to lead these animals in my direction. And they got to the place where I knew that my camera place was. Clicked that shutter, and I thought, wow. Right after that, 2 white swan came honking over my head, flying, beating their wings. I thought, Jesus, what is on that film? I put the slide back in and stuck it under my armpit. Took good care of it till I got to the dark room. During that Irish period, I got acquainted with the stones of the megalithic period. Stonehenge, Callanish was another stone circle up in Scotland. All through the British Isles, the prehistoric megalithic stones were great stones. Megalith meaning large stone. They built these monuments. I don't know how they got those stones in place, let alone from a quarry to the site, but they were quite impressive, and a language in themselves, in the way they were arranged. This Stonehenge particularly was like a sundial, not only for the sun but for the moon. Certain windows at certain times of the year, certain constellations would appear, and so the priest would tell his people, you have to do this and you have to do that. No sacrifices during this period, and so forth. But there was a language in the arrangement and the construction of these stones. This was the last photograph I was able to take at Stonehenge before they closed it off to the public. They literally strung barbed wire around the entire structure so that people wouldn't go in there. They allowed me in to, because I look so serious about when I photograph. They said, you can go in there. Another type of megalithic structure is known as a dolmen. I think it translates to stone table. But again, those uprights are taller than the average man, bearing a great weight that is weightless because of the way it's constructed. And the tilt, it says it's going to take off any minute. That's the prototype to the Concorde, you know. Now, who wouldn't want to use that as a flying carpet? It was stone, but spiritually elevated, spiritually light. Oh gosh, where am I now? Oh, back to, when finished up in Ireland, went back to Connecticut, New England. Took a job as a teacher at New York University and did a lot of photographing in the woods. This is the river. My little cabin was just a short distance up on that piece of land. Spent a lot of time photographing this river and the woods, the surrounding woods. A couple of years of some good work. I still like it. One of those NEA grants, I don't remember how many they gave me, but one of them enabled me to go to Japan. I actually went on the advice of my acupuncturist. He was a Japanese man who taught Aikido. He He had a dojo, but he also treated people with acupuncture. I was not well at that time. And we got to talking about this, that, and the other, and he said, "You have to go to Japan, and I want you to meet my teacher." And he said he teaches a certain form of meditation that you ought to get to know. It's called the Kototama. Kototama translates in Japanese to Word of God. So I thought, why not? Let's go to Japan. And I spent most of my time photographing temples and Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines. They kept that separate. The Shinto were performing all kinds of deeds for people like marriages, births, new business opening, everything to do with life. And their colors were red and white. The Buddhists wore black and white, and they took care of all the death functions. So you had the Buddhists, you had the Shinto. I had a great time in between them. Look at all the work they did for me. All I had to do was make a picture. After a little time in New England, I needed to go to the Southwest. I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Where the hell is this? This is Petrified Forest National Park. That's where it is, in Arizona. And that's just overexposed too. Sorry I don't have prints to show you. Everybody used to say, "Why do you want to photograph in Yosemite?" I mean, Ansel Adams has done it, Edward Weston has done it. Why do you want to go there? I said, well, because I haven't done it. Why can't I do it too? So, the hell with that. I'm going to go and photograph in Yosemite. It's one of the few good ones that I got. From there, what did I do? I went back and forth to England, Ireland, tried to find a way to make a living while I was living in America. And I found that I could do workshops in both places that brought the money in so that I could buy film and make photographs. Good period. And this one is in England. I even remember the County Cheshire. I did a workshop there. A piece of Ireland. Cumbria, right on the border of Scotland and England. You skip over the border from England, you go into Scotland, and suddenly it becomes all mountains. Quite beautiful. Now, if this were at the right tonal depth, you could see the fairies that were hanging out in that area. It was the fairies that invited me in to begin with, and I thought, oh boy. And the print, if you saw an original print, you wouldn't be able to see the fairies, but you'd know they were there. During that period, I lost both my knees. They both had to be totally replaced. And that was a long period of time, maybe 4 or 5 years. and I wasn't able to carry my view camera into the field. But all those years as a young boy and a young man, I collected shells and stones and bones and driftwood, and I would always bring it home. And I thought, what the hell, I don't have to go out in the field. It's all here with me. So I started doing still lifes. When somebody would bring me a bag of fruit, I'd set it out and make a photograph of it. Difficult to see in this exposure, but those are drops of rain on all of the leaves. Believe it or not, I mean, I collected those leaves from my yard, would bring them into my home on a large board, very, very carefully, because any jiggling and you lose them. Twice I bumped into the door on the way in. So I had to collect a whole new bunch of leaves, and eventually I got enough to do this lovely thing. Sorry it's not as lovely for you as it was for me, but projecting slides on the screen sucks. You know who that is? Well, no, he's essentially, yes, corn god. That's the Green Man. In the British Isles, the Green Man is in charge of vegetation, everything that grows, all things in the forest. So I got hold of that Green Man, and I wanted to photograph him, but I wasn't sure quite how. Somewhere along the line, I bought a bunch of corn to eat, but as I was shucking the corn, the sheaves and the corn itself, all of it, I thought, I'm not going to eat this. I'm going to arrange it around the Green Man, and there's his picture. He's now the corn god. I love his crown. Who's that? Somebody knows who that is.
Minion.
It's the Eye of Horus. The Eye of Horus. Single eye with wings attached to the eye itself. I've been very interested in Egyptian mythology, and there is a wonderful painting, drawing that the Egyptians did, and I wanted to do one of my own, and I took pieces of birch bark and so also a wooden bowl in a broken porcelain bowl with the shell within it, till I got the eye, and then as if wings on the outer edges. That's my Eye of Horus. Enables me to travel great distances without going anywhere. That was Horus's function. You didn't know that, did you? Now you know. Now here's another kind of eye. The peach that lived in a fruit bowl for a while. And it began to kind of get very rich. But there was something happening, and I just didn't want it to be disturbed. My daughter-in-law got up one morning and started coffee, sat down at the kitchen table for breakfast, and she looked in and said, "That's disgusting." And she reached in, and I slapped her hand and said, no, don't touch that. It's not ready yet. And so I lifted it out very carefully so that nobody would disturb it, and brought it right down to my studio and made a picture, and damned if the photograph didn't look back at me. There's another single eye just peering up. try to see these about 2 or 3 zones darker. Eucalyptus leaves, which I collected from California, brought back to Maine to photograph. You will never guess what that is. That's a spare 5x7 ground glass which I kept for my granddaughter, and I sat on it. But when I didn't throw it away, it said, no, you're not allowed to throw it out. Look at it. So I started putting it back together, and it said, no, just a little space between each piece. And that's what comes from sitting on something. Some of the other still lifes that I worked with. The death of a snapping turtle. I was driving along the highway and saw this turtle in the middle of the road, and I thought, uh-oh, he had been run over, and I thought, I can't just leave him there. So I turned around and parked and picked him up carefully, put him in my back seat, and brought him home. Set him on the grass in the backyard, and I thought, he'll tell me how to photograph him later. And so I arranged him amongst little bits of fern and that star moss in the background. So it's like a little resurrection photo. He was on his way up. And I'm on my way out. That's the last photograph. I'll allow a few questions. Oh my God.
Paul, you want to tell them the story of when you were at Stonehenge that morning? You were at Stonehenge and you were sitting, waiting to photograph, and it was a foggy morning.
Keep going, you're telling me. They had already closed the Stonehenge off to the public. They were only letting them in certain hours of the day. But they saw that I was rather serious about coming back every year, photographing. They said, we can let you in at 5 in the morning until 9. 9 o'clock we have to open it to the public. And then you can stay at 4 when we close. So I had 2 large spaces without people. Nobody bothered me. And I went in that first morning, and it was very, very foggy. Fog was dense, you couldn't see. I couldn't see this beautiful lady in front of me here. But I was sitting on the rock, on one of the stones, thinking, well, let's see, where would I start? And I heard some crunching in the gravel. Obviously somebody coming up the walkway. And he got closer, and I could hear. He's getting closer and closer, and then he broke through the fog, and there was a guard with a tray, pot of tea, biscuits, cup, milk. He came to serve me tea. Right in the center of Stonehenge. It was lovely.
I have a question. On the picture you took of the deer with the 5x7, did you just have that one image, that negative?
You mean, did I have a second chance?
Right.
Are you kidding? That was it. You know, I mean, the dog told me he wasn't going to round them.
It's a panorama as well.
It's a full 5x7 sheet of film, but the image is really the deer running. If you have too much of the tree up above and too much of the grass below, you lose the effect. I, in fact, sold a print some years ago to a gallery. He wanted to know, what size did I print these? I said, well, I printed on 11 by 14 paper, and then I printed on 16 by 20, and also 20 by 24. So the man said, well, send me the 16-20 size. And I sent him the print, and he phoned and said, the client wants to know where's the rest of his print. You said 16 by 20. He said, but he wants the rest of his print. You know, said,
Paul, when you submit to a gallery, do you submit your photographs as a narrative story of just a single topic matter, or do you submit a lot of different visuals to a gallery?
I'm not sure I know what you're asking.
Well,
Do I tell stories?
well, for example, if you're shooting in your backyard or you're shooting still life, so are you shooting for a consistent type of story narrative, and when you submit to the gallery, are you submitting only those photographs, or you ask them, can I submit a variety of things?
I don't ask them anything. I send what I have been working on recently, and I don't, you know, I tell the galleries what they're going to show, because that's what I'm working on. But no, I don't usually go out photographing with a specific idea in mind. I find that works against me. I mean, I may return to Stonehenge more than once, because I know it's going to offer me much more than one picture. But I rarely go out thinking, I know exactly what I'm going to photograph. I know exactly how to pre-visualize it, make a mess of it in the technique. You know, none of that. I go and nature and light tells me where to stop and what to photograph.
Thank you.
Never the same subject.
Could you say something about your editing process?
Editing process. Yeah, but it's no good, you throw it out. There's a much better editing process. Unfortunately, today and in recent years, cameras take dozens of pictures within seconds. And, you know, bing, 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 so many pictures. That's a big editing job. It'd be far better if you felt where you were and what really is going to work. Don't make so many pictures that you have an editing job.
You mentioned meditation. Was that ever an influence on your work?
I mentioned what?
Meditation?
Meditation. You said predation?
No, meditation.
Meditation.
I don't meditate.
Oh,
I don't have time for that. Did I use the word meditation?
Yeah, in Japan.
in Japan.
Kind of a minor white kind of approach.
Oh, it was Minor that talked about meditation. I used to tell him to buzz off. He always wanted me to meditate in the corner, you know, with a piece of incense and a special corner. And I would say, you know, Minor, why can't I meditate on the ground glass? Let's go out and make photographs, and I'll meditate on the ground glass. He went for that eventually. But meditation is, you know, it's a very interesting process. You could go to church and keep your mouth shut. That would be a kind of a meditation. It's a matter of gaining some inner quiet, however you wish to do that, to be able to be receptive enough to see and photograph if you want. But the meditation is, it's an aspect of simple awareness where you know you can be quiet enough internally that you're totally receptive. So if you need the technique of meditation to get to reception, do it.
You try and use the New Mexico, northern New Mexico light, or you just go out and let it be. Because that light in Santa Fe and up in the mountains is just incredible.
You like it?
I love it.
Yeah, it works pretty good for me once in a while. But light is light. I met a few photographers. We got on a field trip in Death Valley, and they say, "Why are you photographing at noon? The sun is just beaming straight down. Why don't you wait till the sun starts to have a little angle and throw shadows?" And I say, "Well, I might want some of those, but you're missing that sand dune, which is getting light straight from overhead. Look at the color of it. Look at the tone of it. You can photograph in any light."
There's one in the back.
Photography is about light, so learn to photograph it. You know, learn your materials, by the way. What your materials do to influence how light comes through your negatives and prints. Ma'am.
Thank you for being here first. I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
It's not my fault. Ann Jastrup is the culprit.
My question is, have you ever considered doing a trip with your son and photographing approximately the same? I know he does landscapes too. Is that not true? And he does color, right?
Yeah, he doesn't know any better.
Well, I was just wondering, it would be interesting to see how the two of you take the same subject and photograph.
We spent a couple of months together. He was tired of college. He's a very bright student. He likes education, but he went to a high school that was more like junior college. And then he went immediately into college, Yale University. After 2 semesters, he said, "Dad, I'm tired. And Mom won't let me take any time off. She says, get your degree and get it over with. You know what, help." I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what. We'll take your tuition money for next semester. I'll break my piggy bank, and we'll take off and go to Europe. We're going to take a little trip right through the British Isles into Switzerland." And he said, "What do we tell Mom?" I said, "We don't tell her. We'll send her a postcard." So we went together, and he used a view camera. We photographed primarily some landscape, but mostly the Cistercian abbeys in southern France. Very beautiful structures, internally as well as outside. And he went his way and photographed what he thought was good, and I made my photographs. He got the best one out of all of it. You know, he saw something in a church, and he managed it. But he was much more interested in the architectural structure of the buildings and color. He behaved himself. He did the black and white work. He's been in the dark room with me. He didn't stay very long in the dark room because literally he would sneeze when he was there. And he had a legitimate reaction to the chemicals. He said, "Dad, I can't do it." And he signed up for a course in digital photo Adobe inkjet printing. And he said, "I'm home. This is my place. I've got $1 million coloring book with this computer and inkjet printing." So he went his way, left the dark room, all to myself and my students.
Do you have a favorite black and white film?
Why?
Just curious.
My favorite black and white film is What Works. I've used Ilford, it works. I've used Tri-X, it works. They all work. And if you're subtle enough, they do have different qualities in them, characteristic curves. If you're subtle enough to use that, if you don't blow it away with zone system. But any film that's, I use more than one film.
As far as using light meters, did you prefer a spot meter over a handheld meter?
Much more the spot meter, because I didn't have to travel as far to get a reading of a shadow or a bright spot. Not that I was lazy, it's just more accurate with this spot meter. What a bunch of quiet faces.
Paul, Paul, I've known you 40 years, and I think this is...
Oh my God, you blabbermouth.
I think this is one of the most astounding slideshows I've ever seen done. I've seen a lot, thank you, and I feel like I didn't know you at all until I saw
Oh
you
my,
today.
how good.
Really, really beautiful, thank you.
So, Paul, did you make it back to Egypt? Did you ever go to Egypt?
Not physically. The Eye of Horus, the Uja they call it, the single eye, is a depiction of a faculty within the human being that can function if it's ever released. So an out-of-body experience, did you ever hear of that? An out-of-body experience, some will notice that it's their third eye, single eye, that takes them. So I've never been to Egypt physically, but I escaped a few times in my dream state and found myself at the Egyptian temples. No, it's not interesting. It's absolutely necessary for anybody who wants to pursue one's inner nature and one's inner spirit. We don't pay enough attention to our dreams. And in particular, trying to find that place, that moment when dream meets the physical reality. You're just beginning to wake up, and the dream is still with you. If you could slip in between and be active to both places. That's when St. Peter will say, "What the hell are you doing here? You're too early."
Is it a couple more?
I have a question, Ken.
This young man here.
Does music still help you find that special place in your photography?
No, music is a special place. Music is a special place, as my photography is. The music comes in through the ear, and it goes to your consciousness. Mostly it goes straight to your emotional system. With the photography, it comes through the eyes, which are mostly linked with physical reality and the intellectual noise place there. The visual world has to transcend all of that intellectual, academic, noisy, before it can go to the heart to really see something. With music, it goes through the ear and goes straight to the heart. It goes direct to the feelings, which, if you allow it to work, because this guy upstairs, he's always beating down on it, saying he knows best. It's full of shit, you know. It's the eye in the heart that sees. And sound. Sound activates that part of your emotional system that opens you, makes you more receptive. So I still use, I play music, and I will continue to do so, and I'll listen to certain kinds of music. Yes, indeed, it's a big help. There was another man here.
So what you did to your garden was the garden, the positive prints.
Oh, yes.
That was extraordinary. And I was thinking, if I did the same thing to my color images, people would look away in half a second. Between this monochrome and polychrome, why did this technique work there? It has a magic in the monochrome. To the master I asked why.
I'm glad you asked me. As a master, I'm a Phi Beta master, or a Phi Master Beta. It's up to you to find a way to get what you feel as the magic in the color across through the images you present to your audience. You've got the job of educating them. So you have to feel passionate enough about that matter to do it because you're convinced of it and it feels good to you and you want to share it. You can't ask the outer world to go along with what you feel because they're too busy being fickle about this, that, and the other. It's a lonely process.
Thank you.
I'm never lonely because I have so many fucking students after me.
Here's comes one.
I was never a student. It's not too late though. So any more questions before we go upstairs and drink a little wine?
Oh yeah, wine. You have one more? Oh, wine.
Wine, all right.
Wine.
Everyone, remember to take your chairs if you brought them. Thank you.